There is an agreement which has fundamentally shaped Australian society today, from politics to the economy, from the rise of One Nation to the housing unaffordability crisis. You might not even know about it, most people don't. It is known today as the Prices and Incomes Accord. Signed in 1982 and ratified by the 1983 election of Bob Hawke's Labor Party, this agreement brought together the government, the unions and business all together to decide the future of this country. The end result was the collapse of the union movement and the explosive growth of finance. The Accord era spanned from 1983 to 1996, yet the consequences of it are far-reaching and still with us today. But what the Accord constituted is what's called a risk shift in the academic literature. Essentially, risk in society was shifted from collective institutions, like the state, onto private individual households. Prior to neoliberalism, risks such as poverty were seen by the state as something to insure against, which was done through strictly regulating the economy. However, as these regulations were done away with and as other collective institutions such as unions were demobilized, the risk of things like poverty or housing was shifted onto the individual. Increasingly, instead of relying on the state for a public home, you now have to borrow large amounts of money and go into copious amounts of debt in order to purchase a private property. There are two key consequences of this risk shift: a deteriorated union movement and the housing unaffordability crisis that we're in today. As risks are shifted onto the individual, less people are willing to join their union. This is both because unions as collective institutions are less able to insure people against risks such as poverty, and because individuals who are indebted are much less likely to join their union out of fear of losing their job. This goes hand in hand with our current housing crisis. As financialisation made it easier and easier to borrow more and more money, Australian financial institutions saw the housing market as a safe place to lend towards, particularly after the 1990 recession. This made housing investment more attractive to owner-occupiers and investors, who now had a greater ability to go into huge amounts of debt to buy up housing. As we can see, housing debt rose throughout the 1980s and rose even more dramatically after the 1990 recession. Today, Australian households are some of the most highly indebted households in the world. Furthermore, 60% of bank lending in Australia is in housing, and banks are the 4 largest shares on the Australian Stock Exchange. In other words, our entire financial system and the majority of the country are reliant on housing prices continually and substantially increasing. Thus, financialisation under Hawke and Keating, not tweakable tax settings, immigration or zoning regulation, explain the underlying problems with the Australian housing market.